Hello there, Kalamazoo Youth Development Network. My name is Rafael Wolf, WOLF. You can find me at vote3p.com. That's VOTE, the number 3, P as in party.com. There I've got many long form essays you can read or audio commentary if you would like to just listen. And it's not a reading, it's me commenting about what I have written and why I wrote it. I don't know why I wasn't invited necessarily. I think it was just somebody dropped the ball to this political candidate forum. I'm running as a third party candidate. I'm not a member of the establishment, it's called. So if you're taking notes, you should look up that term, the establishment and third party. I'm running as a libertarian, not as a Republican, not as a Democrat. And I think third parties are crucial to fixing the problem that we have in America, which I will talk about here shortly. So I'd like to thank Meg Blinkowitz, I think is how you say her last name, for affording me an opportunity to make this video and chat at you for a moment about your questions. So these questions were sent to me, and instead of answering them one at a time, I'll sort of just summarize in a discussion form what I think these issues are. I think some of these questions, if I were to answer them, taking up a few minutes each, would turn this into a half-hour long video, and I'm almost 100% certain you'd turn me off by then. But, you know, these questions, some of them evolved around police brutality, gun violence, just violence in general, and then mental health. That was the first sort of portion of the bulk of these questions. And history is our guide for most everything, I think. In order for you as a young person, and I'm surprised young people are actually interested in politics or interested in government for that matter. I know I wasn't when I was a kid, and I don't know many of my peers that were. But, you know, you don't vote. You don't have a dog in the fight. Even if policy affects you, you know, what are you going to do? Because you don't vote, the candidates don't care about you. They say they care about children, but really, like many things, candidates use children as political tools, as props, as a mechanism to encourage voters or get voters to think of them in a certain way. Oh, they're for the children, they must be good. Even if the policy that they're implementing doesn't really benefit children at all, or it harms someone else for that matter, like the elderly. You know, politicians seem to care about a whole lot of things when the cycle rolls around and they need your vote. And so mental illness, police brutality, and gun violence was sort of the first 4 or 5 questions. And again, letting history be our guide, what you end up finding is that the establishment, the Democratic and Republican Party, are very much in line with continually funding at ever greater dollar amounts the police and their brutality. They continue to push forward things like qualified immunity. So you're going to want to look that up and read about it and learn about it. What is qualified immunity? And it gives the police, if they were reasonably threatened, the right to kill somebody and not suffer any consequence for doing so. And that has happened many, many times. And it's sad. So I think we need to end that. And people talk about ending it, but they never do. They could just continually give more power to what's called the police state. So you're going to want to look that up and read about it as well. You know, the mental illness thing. Before I move on to that, the policing, just generally speaking, has a long history. You should look up the history of policing, where it came from, how it started, how it developed and evolved. And it started from private businesses trying to, you know, hiring security to bust up unions and unionization and workers, and protecting businesses from workers and workers' rights when the workers wanted more from a business, like well over 100 years ago. So understanding the history and the origins of some of these things is super important. I enjoyed history when I was a student and a young person, and I think knowing more about it shapes your present worldview, because a lot of the outcomes, the reasons why things exist, the reasons how, why and how things work, were set forth in a template from back then. Policing in the 60s was, I should say, gun laws, that many of which started in the 60s, was an attempt to depower militant blacks, known as like the Black Panther Party, and others who were wielding guns and threatening violence, like physical violence with weapons. You see a lot of pictures online of the Black Panther Party, many of which are brandishing weapons. And so the establishment, Democrats and Republicans that were in power at that time, said, oh, how do we protect ourselves from this threat? And so the reaction is law and legislation passed among this collusionary group known as the duopoly. That's something you'll want to look up as well. The partnership between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to maintain power. They needed to strip the weapons away from this threat, at least to avoid physical violence. And then they went about to, over the next 50 years, build the prison industrial complex. So again, that's another term you're going to want to look up. What does he mean by prison industrial complex? Run by private corporations. And so these things get very complicated and sort of difficult to understand, but if you sort of whet your appetite with reading or listening to people that talk about these things, and grow you grow in understanding and experience and wisdom as you get older. So it'd be good to expose yourself, if you're interested in politics and policy, to focus on the history of these things. Mental health care is part of health care. There's a history of healthcare in this country, how it evolved into what we have today. It revolves around money and private interests and insurance companies and who can make the most profit from our illnesses. It's not necessarily about good quality healthcare at an affordable price. Getting something of quality for a cheap amount of money, or affordability, is not, those two don't go together. And so we can't live in some kind of fantasy land to think that what we have is good and efficient and affordable. It's kind of bad, it's inefficient, and it's certainly not affordable. And so I know what the problems are, but again, you're sending a legislator to Lansing to try to fix these things, check the time here, is not going to resolve any issues. And then so they always promise dumping more money into mental health care services. Sure, that might work. I don't know. The cost of drugs for mental illness, the number of mental illnesses is off the chain. People have tons of anxieties. I think some of that derives from, especially the anxiety portion, derives from a lack of control in their own lives, because of government overreach and government policy, driven again by people who want control. And they want to turn society into something called neo-feudalism. So definitely look that up. And that might be a reason why we are suffering from so many mental illnesses, much of which is anxiety driven, and a feeling of being captured by the system. And then there's the gun violence situation. Again, the history around that. Gun deaths, I think, is what I talk about on the website. I have a thing there that talks about 2A, or the Second Amendment, and guns. And gun deaths is 53% of that is suicide, but you'll never hear that from anybody. That's the overwhelming majority of the number, by the way. Gun deaths is suicide, which again sort of loops back around to mental health. And all these things are sort of meshed together. Mental health and healthcare touches on gun deaths. And so what's sensational to talk about is mass murders or mass shootings. And that's a very small percentage of all gun deaths. So I think we need to think about things from a slightly different perspective. And all these numbers, all these numbers are from the CDC. So you can, go on to your favorite search engine and look up annual gun deaths in the United States, and you'll run into that statistic from the CDC's website that I'm talking about. And you'll begin to teach yourself, like, whoa, 53% are suicide. If we just helped with mental health, we can reduce the number of gun deaths in this country. That's an amazing thing. Gun violence also, I think, is just a mental health problem, because sane, rational people don't threaten other people with guns. And there's also deeper socioeconomic, that's something you want to look up, socioeconomic issues related to everything we just talked about: policing, murder, and gun death, and mental illness. There's a socioeconomic component to that, where the struggle, so to speak, it helps perpetuate some of these extreme situations. So there's another question here, what do you want from people, and what are you giving in return? Everybody has a boss, who do you answer to? Helping LGBTQ folks, how's the community going to be different? And how would you explain this stuff to your guardian or parent? I'm pro equality. As a libertarian, I like equality, freedom, options, and choice. And so I think it doesn't matter who you are. You could be any color or any sexual preference or persuasion, and you should be treated fairly and equally. But I do recognize certain laws need to be put in place to force equality, and that's unfortunate. I don't really have a boss. I own my own business. That gives you a level of independence and freedom. Technically, the customers are my boss, right? You have to have customer service, and so I guess technically everybody has a boss. Certain people may not. The voters think they are the boss of the candidates or the elected officials, but they're not. The real bosses are the people who fund campaigns and fund the political machines from the duopoly. Another good word you're going to want to look up and read about. That's the combined efforts of the Democratic and Republican Party, which, by the way, are private businesses with private interests, and they have their own agendas. So they only use the voting class to get into office and maintain their power. And they often trick the voting class into voting for them with things like, oh, don't vote for a libertarian or a Green Party person or an independent because you're wasting your vote. That's something you're probably going to hear your entire life. And I've recently written an essay on the website that talks about who's in charge in Lansing and Washington, D.C., and how if you vote for an establishment duopoly candidate from the Democratic and Republican Party, that you actually do waste your vote. Because in a representative democracy, you vote for somebody to represent you. But once they get put onto a committee meeting, there's this thing called the parliamentary process or parliamentary procedure, how they go about doing the business that they do in Lansing, that strips the power of your representative away, making your vote totally useless because it makes them powerless. And you'll often hear candidates talk about, oh, I'm on the committee of so-and-so, and I tried to get this amendment put in and passed, but so-and-so blocked it. And so that's how it works, because that other person is more powerful, because they take, you become powerful by taking someone else's power away from them. And so my goal, if given the opportunity, is to break that power dynamic to where these committee chairs in the parliamentary process, which is all unelected stuff, by the way, your elected representative is sitting in these things, but the power is taken into a committee chair who runs the meeting and can block anything from coming out. I want to break that process up. I want to turn the committee chair into a meeting organizer. They can't block legislation. They can't stop a representative from getting other people to collude with them and pass legislation or take old legislation off the books, for example, and clean up and streamline operations and government. So we actually have a good, working, functional democracy. We don't live in a democracy, by the way. We live in a bit of what's called a banana republic. Again, another good thing to look up if you're taking notes. And that's not the retail outlet chain. A banana republic is a type of government that's controlled by corporate interests, and it's really corporate run. And that's what we live in, is a corporate run society. And they are the ones who fund the politicians and sort of tell the politicians what they want. And of course, they give crumbs to the rest of society. And so the corporations kind of rule, what's called rule by proxy. It looks like legislators and politicians are making the rules, but they're not. They're getting instructions and told what to do from special interests, business people, multinational corporations, bankers, and investment types, on Wall Street. And they give you the illusion of a democracy. They give you the feeling that your vote is not wasted, when in reality it is. So when you go back to your parent or guardian and you talk to them about this libertarian person, you could say, this libertarian person spoke about a lot of things I've never heard about. What does he mean when he says duopoly? What does he mean when he says banana republic? What does he mean when he talks about the police state? What does he mean when he talks about how important history is to our understanding of where we're at today and why things work the way they do? I think what you might find is that your parent or guardian haven't been exposed to some of these ideas and ways of thinking. They might be like, I don't know what a banana republic is. Do you mean the store at the mall? And that's nothing against them. It just sort of shows how much more education we need in this country, how much more emphasis should be put on history, how much more emphasis should be put on transparency in government, showing and telling people how things really work. So feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or at my website, vote3p.com. I would love to engage with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.